Hello, and welcome to My Home is Special. My name is Taylor, and today is going to be a bit different. We're going to ask Keith questions overall about all of his trips and kind of recap what's been happening over the last couple of weeks. So, Keith, welcome.
Thanks, Taylor. Let's do this.
So let's start off with talking about why we even decided to do this episode and how we came up with this idea.
Yeah, we had talked about doing the recap episodes, and they're coming out while I'm doing the next leg sort of interview episodes. We thought it might be fun to reflect on the South America leg of the trip. It was our longest trip ever, a little over 5 weeks, and we've talked a lot about what we did on each trip and a story from each trip. But there are also just some takeaways after being away for so long and traveling through the region that we thought might be good to share. We also want to talk a little bit about what comes next.
Is there anything that we didn't get to cover in these episodes that you wanted to include? We've covered so much, but I'm sure there's something that we didn't get to.
Every time I look through the pictures, I remember something that we did that I forgot to mention. I'm like, oh, I should have talked about that, or I should have talked about that. And, we covered a lot. There were maybe 2 or 3 things that we didn't really talk about that were evident to Tosh and I as we thought about all 5 of the countries we visited. The first was the Spanish. In his episode, Ian talked about missing home and it being special for him because he felt like he could speak his own Spanish. And anybody that's been to Chicago knows there are neighborhoods here where you can go and speak Spanish only. You don't have to speak English. And that stood out to me because I was like, well, what do you mean? And when we were in Spain, I could tell they were speaking a little bit of a different Spanish. But in South America, you could see and hear the differences. So, for example, when we were in Bolivia and parts of Peru, people were speaking Quechua, which was basically an indigenous language from my understanding. And it sounds a little bit like Spanish, but it's not Spanish. And so you think you're hearing it, but you're not really understanding anything. And you realize, oh, that's not Spanish. But when we were at Carnival, they would speak Spanish during their acting, and it was so fast. I mean, it was like listening to a guy at an auction. It was just, I can understand Spanish when I hear it, but there I couldn't because it was so fast. And then when we were in Argentina, where, as Amelia said, there's a ton of Italian immigrants, it was such an expressive Spanish. It was part what they said, and they would get very animated in the hand gestures. And it was honestly like stereotypical what you think of when you think about watching Italians argue or Italians speak, except it was all in Spanish. And so we got to experience like these different dialects, if you will, of Spanish in a way that we didn't expect. And it was just really neat to see and experience.
So what else besides that?
There were 2 other things. So one was the diversity of people. I would say especially in Uruguay and Argentina, but really everywhere. We mentioned we didn't see a lot of Black people, but the diversity of everyone was really cool. The immigration that came into that part of the world really came from all over. And a lot of people, at least visibly, seemed like they were of mixed ethnicity. When we were in Bolivia or Argentina or Chile, you really couldn't tell by looking who was a tourist and who was a local until you started speaking with them. And I understand that from my own family heritage as somebody who's Belizean and Crucian and Dominican, and knowing that on my dad's side, there's indigenous blood in that line of the family. And it's a giant mixing of ethnicities and backgrounds that you see. And when you walk around pretty much all of these countries, you just look around and go, I would never guess where they were from. And you just realize that there's just all these different lineages of people, but they all consider themselves Bolivian or Argentinian or Chilean or Uruguayan, which was really neat for us. And then the diversity experiences. One of the things we like about traveling is that you get to try different things and experience different things. And I think we talked a lot in the episodes about the different vibes, whether it was nature or the big city or a small city or a small town, and just getting a chance to do different things. And when we traveled around to all the different stops that we made, and there was probably over 10 stops over the course of 5 weeks, probably closer to 15 or 20, we got to experience a lot of different things. When you combine that with the other stuff that we talked about already on these episodes, the first leg of the trip was off to a really good start. So we were really excited about that and looking forward to the next one.
Diversity is a very common word that I feel like we talk a lot about nowadays, just in everything. But it sounds like you experienced real, authentic diversity, and that to me is just beautiful. And I am absolutely so excited to just hear this.
The diversity that we saw, I want to be careful about assuming that people's lived experiences is as a single culture of people. I can't speak to that because I don't know that I was there long enough. But what I can say is that when we went to different events, especially when we didn't go to the touristy events and we went to where the locals were and we looked around, to us as outsiders, it looked like they were enjoying it as part of one community, which is different than where we've been other places where it's very clear that there are different sections and different groups of people hanging out together. We saw people that looked like they had different ancestries going back generations from different parts of the world. But when they were in that space, they were experiencing it as one group of people from one community and one culture, which was really neat for us.
So we kind of already did our recap now. Now I want to really jump into some deeper questions.
Okay.
So what's next for My Home is Special? What's the vision moving forward?
As we record this, I'm leaving for Asia in a few days. So as people are hearing this, we will already be several weeks into the next trip or the next leg of our trips. Hopefully people will be enjoying the 5 Asia interviews and the 5 South America recaps we've been doing, and this will be at the end of those recaps. We had 2 4-week trips planned after the Asia trip, but we're going to have to combine those into a single 6 or 7-week trip. I know that's not a real world problem, but it was tricky to get visas, and we realized that going across the Atlantic twice in back-to-back trips doesn't make any sense. So we're just going to combine them into a longer single trip. Sadly, we can't get the tickets until we get the visas, and one of the countries is making us mail our passports in, and I can't do that since we're leaving for Asia. So when we get back from Asia, I'm probably going to be home for about 3 weeks in the States, and we're going to try and expedite the process in that first week so that we can buy tickets in the second week, and hopefully it'll all work out and won't be too expensive. But soon after this, you'll start getting the recap episodes for Asia, which will happen as we're on our last leg of our trips in Europe and Africa. And then I have some post-sabbatical plans, but we'll have to cover that in a recap episode down the line.
That actually leads perfectly into my next question. So you've toured a decent amount of countries up until this point, and you're planning on visiting a lot more. I am personally very curious, and I hopefully speak for the rest of the listeners. What has it been like trying to plan all of this? This is so much. And is there anything important you've learned along the way that you can share with us for people that are hoping one day to be able to have a similar experience to yours?
Well, I see people who finish school and go backpack for a month at a time and just sort of say, well, I did 4 weeks post-graduation in this part of the world. And I always wondered how they did it, but it seemed like they just sort of bounce sort of wherever the wind takes them. And I had things I really wanted to see, which made this a little trickier. And as I mentioned, this is the longest trip that we've taken, easily by 2 or 3x. And to string 3 of those together in one 6-month period is a lot. We probably started planning this 7 or 8 months ago, if not longer. And I had a sense of the countries and the places I wanted to visit. And I started talking with some friends. One of the friends was a tour operator, and he gave me some advice on how long to spend in each place. And I got some really good advice from a friend of a friend. My friend Lexi introduced me to Dan Curran, who did a 1-year trip with his family around the world, but he never went back home. And he gave me advice like, plan some downtime. And I already knew that because I just felt like we might need a break. But he said, no, be intentional about planning days where you have nothing to do but like catch up, do your laundry, if you have to log in and do email. And he was also planning as he was gone. So he needed like planning days on his trip because they were about to fly someplace and he needed to have that. He also told me not to choose a project that was so much work that I can't enjoy the trip. And so the Asia and South America episodes, I actually recorded those before we left, and then they released while we were gone, kind of like we're doing right now. And so I was able to enjoy the trip and take photos and maybe log in and make sure the post went up, but I wasn't like an influencer who can't enjoy the trip because they're always worried about finding the amazing selfie and creating the amazing video. And they're not really experiencing the trip as much as they're trying to curate the impression or the image of their trip on their social media feed. So he said, look, leave some planning time on the trips, plan some downtime on the trips, and don't pick a project that is so much work that you can't enjoy the trip yourself. And I think we did most of that.
That actually makes me think of how now when I go to concerts, I try not to use my phone as much. I try to just live in the moment of it, which is really good advice. But it makes me think about you got to apply that to a trip because you want to get the memories. But I also think of how often do we really go back and look at those photos? Like your photos are amazing. I'm always going to go back and look at those. But how often do I go back and look at my own photos of trips? So it also has me kind of thinking that way as well.
Yeah, it was good. I know that I was going to take a lot of photos, so that for me is not work. I'm planning the time of day we go to certain places and the place that we're going because I know the photos that I want to try and get. So that for me is part of the trip and the fun of the trip. It's not the work of the trip. And then to round out the answer to your original question, I look at a rough plan of the places I want to go, and then I literally pull up a map and try and figure out how to route it. And the question is, can you actually get from point A to point B? Because if you're just dragging your finger on your phone screen, you can go anywhere. And I actually use ChatGPT a lot to figure out like how many days is typical and what do people typically do and how do you get from point A to point B. And ChatGPT was really helpful. And then between that and some spreadsheets that start with the days and then start with the cities and then I fill in activities and then flights. And once I book flights, I book hotels. It starts to come into focus pretty clearly. What I would say the most important part is traveling with someone who's willing to go with the flow and try some new things and trust me. And I talked about in Argentina how I took us off the wrong path with an Uber. And we've had some other mishaps like that along the way, but we just roll with it and it just becomes part of the story. We had this plan and it totally fell apart because I booked it for the wrong day or I screwed up and went to the wrong place and we nearly missed our ferries twice while we were gone and we nearly missed a flight once while we were gone. And that just becomes part of the story. And as long as you're traveling with someone who doesn't freak out and blame and sort of get all bent out of shape about it, you just kind of roll with it. And we did that this time and that made it a lot more fun.
That actually leads into my next question perfectly again. So, you've been able to go along this entire journey with your wife, Tasha, and that's pretty phenomenal to me. And not many people can say that they're able to do that, especially I imagine being married. What has been the best part and the most surprising part of having her join you? And if anyone's like me, any listeners are like me, they love the trailer off bat. So is there any way we could convince her to speak more as listeners, like to join the pod? I already know the answer, but I'm just still going to ask.
So that last question is easier. She's made it clear she wants no part of coming on the podcast, but we can keep working at it. We've got a couple more months to try and break her down. We'll see how that goes. She is documenting the journey on her own way with a daily photo and journaling as we go, which is really cool. So a little bit of the recap episodes and thinking about what we did was really helped by talking with her and remembering some of what we did and remembering what was special to her on the trips because she is really documenting that even though she's not sharing it on the podcast yet. As far as things being surprising, we travel a lot. This is a lot longer of a trip than we've ever done, but we've traveled a lot and we've been married almost 26 years. Our anniversary will actually be on the trip about the time people are hearing this episode. And our first trip together was actually 30 years ago when she graduated high school. So we've been traveling together for a long time and we're pretty used to each other, which is part of why we try and make sure we have some downtime and some alone time on the trips, especially trips that are this long. So far, so good. No surprises, except for the fact that we're really enjoying every day and experiencing all these different things together.
That is actually so cool to me that your relationship has been marked by these beautiful experiences. And I imagine that's what you guys invest a lot of your time and resources into.
We try and invest in experiences, not things. When we buy things that we want. But for the most part, I think if you look back over the years, we try and create great experiences for us and for our boys. And when we can, we bring family and friends and enjoy it with them as well. But to us, the experiences have been really what you take away. You mentioned you may not look back at the photos, but you'll look back at the memories and you'll think about the things that you did. And we've been fortunate enough to have some great ones. This is a little bit different because we're not just going and collecting experiences or having experiences, but it's in the context of people telling us what's special about the experiences that we're having, and we're able to experience things in a little bit of a different way because we have the context that the guests on this podcast have been providing for us before we went.
I really want to dig into, just personally for me, this is something I want to know. Where would you like to visit, but you realized it's probably not possible as you was planning this trip, and why?
We have a list of places that we want to go. We've had the list for well over 10, 15 years now, and we try and knock out 2 or 3 a year. And when we decided to take the time away, we said, well, at the pace we're going, we'll be 90 before we finish this list. So we need to bang out a bunch all at once, which is what we're doing now. We had about 15 to 20 countries on the list, and we're hitting almost all of them. You know, I'm bummed that I didn't get to add Easter Island, but in the time frame that I needed to be in South America, sort of taking that trip out would have just been too much. Again, following Dan Curran's advice, we weren't trying to bounce hotels and, you know, every 2 days or every day move to a different hotel. We were trying to get like 3 or 4 days so we could unpack and we could like be in the hotel room and not sort of constantly be on the go. That said, there were some places that just didn't make sense. You know, we really want to go to Australia and New Zealand, and it just, we would have had to tack it on to Asia, because if I didn't want to fly across the Atlantic twice, I sure as heck don't want to fly to Asia twice. Antarctica sounded really cool, but it just didn't make sense. And again, it was really expensive. And there's some places in Europe like Iceland and the Nordics that we wanted to see, but we're just not going to get to it this time. And again, that's not a real problem because we're still having a great experience and seeing a lot of the world. But there's a lot out there, which is why I said when we talked earlier, I won't be going back to the same places twice because there's a lot more things to see for the first time. And so when this is done, I'll go back to work and we'll start back on our path of checking things off the list as we go.
Digging into the path, from when you first thought about this concept till currently right now, I'm sure you've had to make a lot of changes in how you go along this journey. I want to know, what were some of the biggest changes, and were you disappointed of anything that you really couldn't do?
So no disappointments, because they're either good experiences or they're bad experiences, but they're all new experiences. And so we just focus on the newness of it and the stories that come from the debacles that were the trip to Valparaiso or the stomach bug while I was traveling, so on and so forth. There haven't been any really big changes. As we record this, I'm finished with the first leg of the trip in South America, and that went relatively smoothly. No major drama. A couple hiccups. I mentioned the tour operator being a little crazy or getting sick and nearly missing different parts of our connections, but everything went pretty smoothly. And so far, all of our visas came through for Asia yesterday, so it looks like we're good for that part of the trip, and we're looking forward to finalizing the booking, and we have some friends joining us while we're in Asia. The biggest change, I think, was combining the last 2 trips into one longer trip, partly driven by the fact that when you're not using a tour operator, you actually have to be responsible for everything. And I randomly decided to check one day to see if I needed visas for Ghana and Nigeria, and the answer was yes. Not only was the answer yes, you couldn't get them on arrival and you couldn't do e-visas. You need to actually fill out the application and mail them your passport for 2 weeks. Well, when I figured that out, I was only going to be home for 2 weeks and I need my passport to go on this Asia trip. So when we get back, we're going to have a couple weeks. And in those couple of weeks, assuming I can't get it at the embassy in Korea or Bangkok, I will be trying to expedite a visa to Ghana. And unfortunately, that means I won't have time to get a visa for Nigeria. So we're sort of rerouting ourselves through Europe and Africa for that last trip that we're going to take. And we'll see where it goes. But the experience of sort of organizing this and asking those questions and figuring it out has been fun unto itself.
So now you've got 1 down, 2 more to go. What are some takeaways so far?
One of the things that I've been doing on these trips when we have a chance to talk with other people traveling, and a lot of them honestly are, I'll say, much further into their lives than we are, if I could say it like that. And getting a chance to talk with them about how they think about it, and also just talking together about what we're experiencing and what we want the next, 10 to 20 years of our travels to look like, assuming we can still travel like this for the foreseeable future. There were a couple of takeaways that I have right now that'll probably still evolve as we do more trips. The first was do it now. Saving up for later sounds good, and I know I was big on saving up for retirement and thinking about how I'll travel when I'm retired. But the truth is, it's way harder to enjoy it the same way when we're older. Climbing up a rock face in Peru or walking 10 miles in Uruguay, I can do that now. I'm not sure I'd want to do that 10, 20 years down the line. And so doing it now actually makes a lot of sense. And we met a lot of people that said, you're so lucky you're doing this now, because this is a lot harder for us, where we are. The second thing was really unplug. I usually do a good job of making sure people know from my out of office that I am not to be bothered unless it's an emergency. In fact, my out of office internally right now says, if you have an emergency and you believe that I would agree it's an emergency, you can contact me this way. Otherwise, don't contact me. And I deleted the apps off my phone, so I don't have my work email. I don't have Teams. I'm not bringing my work laptop. So I literally cannot get work emails if I tried. I'm not sort of shadow reading while I'm traveling. I am truly offline while I'm gone. Ironically, the software on my phone for security kept trying to reinstall Outlook for the first 4 days I was there. So I actually had to call the office a week into our trip and say, like, how do I turn this thing off? It wasn't an accident. I deleted it on purpose. But really unplugging has been really great. So do it now, really unplug. And then focus on the experiences. I mentioned trying alpaca or jumping into a glacier lake and things like that. And just trying to get out of my comfort zone has been a good part of the experience. Trying to observe things the way they are and trying to blend in to the community as opposed to having them bend it for me as a tourist is also something that we've been trying to do. And then just try and keep a positive spin on everything. Even the bad stuff becomes part of the experience. And I'll probably end up telling the story on the open mic at some point down the line of the circus day that we had trying to see Valparaiso, or trying to travel while I'm sick, or realizing that I screwed up the visa situation. And so focusing on the experiences has been the other thing that I think has been really good for us.
I would love to just jump in and say, like, personally for me, my takeaways from just being able to hear your experience and then be so lucky to be able to talk to you about it. I love what you said about doing it now. It has inspired me and encouraged me that I know I want to travel. And yes, I'm waiting till I get older and I have more resources and I have more time, but I gotta carve the time out now because I want to see the world. I want to see what's out there. And I think these experiences you've had and how you detailed them has only painted a greater picture of what I want my own personal travel journey to be like. And I think I can speak for many listeners when I say, when you say do it now, it's like, yeah, Keith is right. I got to do it now. So thank you for that.
I would say, Taylor, do it now if you can do it the way you want to do it. I don't think that 20 years ago I could have done it the way I wanted to and seen all the things that I wanted to see. But if I waited 20 years from now, I also wouldn't be able to, but not because I didn't have the means to do it. I just wouldn't have the energy or the physical ability to. And so there is a little bit of a sweet spot. And when I say do it now, and for us, this has been a really good time. We're still able to do pretty much everything we want on the trips and do them the way we want them. So we've been really blessed in that way. And we're looking forward to leaving in a couple days for the next adventure on a 5 a.m. flight that's going to take us 24 hours of travel to get where we're going. So Taylor, as we wrap up this episode after recording 5 recap episodes, I want to say thanks for agreeing to do this. It is great to have a different voice and a different creative mind in the room as we think about these. And I'm hoping that we can do this again when I get back from Asia and talk about the 5 countries we saw there and do another one of these recap episodes before the last trip. Hopefully by then I'll have my visas and we'll be on our way.
I want to thank you, Keith, for reaching out to me and asking me, did I want to do this? And me giving you a heck yes. This has been one of the most amazing experiences I've personally had. And it's really got me thinking about so much. So thank you.
Cool. And Taylor, when we do this recap of the recap episodes next time, maybe we'll have to get into how you got your nickname. Deal?
Deal.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get future episodes automatically. Go to myhomeisspecial.com for the occasional email update too. That's where links to photo galleries and a few other surprises will live. Be sure to follow KBev Photo on Instagram for behind-the-scenes footage during our journey, and it'll be in the stories. If you just want the photos, go to kbevphoto.com. There's a lot else on there to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.